I'm Susan Arrayes, publisher of Seniors Blue Book, Greater Boston. And today I'm thrilled to be partnering again with Aileen Gerhardt, a certified patient advocate and founder of Beacon Patient Solutions, and Kathleen Summers, a nurse lawyer and co-founder of Generations Law. Today's the second part of the two-part series on Solo Agers. Today, we're going to quickly recap what we covered and then discuss how to develop your plan and what resources are available to you. Our goal, again, is to empower you to make decisions that'll impact your life going forward and hopefully lighten your concerns. For those that weren't on the call last month, there is a recording on seniorsbluebook.com, and I will send it out with today's recording when we have it ready. Kathleen and Aileen, all yours. Can you briefly go over what we covered last time and then jump into the homework?
Nice to see those of you returning who did have an opportunity to participate with our first portion of this series. But if you didn't, hopefully you still will find this to be very helpful. And we'll give a quick recap in terms of what we talked about the first time. So I think, Aileen, one of the big things that, we really wanted people to understand about all of this, first of all, talking about what a solo ager is, how we define. And the truth is I think we came to a conclusion that, there are many definitions of a solo ager, and a lot of it is how you self-identify.
Right. So the general framework, the real critical piece about identifying as a solo ager is really what a support system looks like. So when we talk about a framework for solos, we're talking about folks who may or may not be married or partnered, who might live by themselves and or with a partner if they're involved in their world, either didn't have children or had children, but for a variety of reasons, the children or other adult family members are unable to play a role in the aging senior's life.
Absolutely. And so one of the things Aileen had put together and shared with us all, this wonderful kind of continuum, as I believe, Aileen, you describe it, because it really is a continual circle. There is no beginning and end to it, and there's no particular starting point, I think, for it either. It really is a continuum for people to consider. And this is what everyone had received as a homework. We had briefly begun to talk about the different aspects of this continuum. And we had asked everybody to kind of go back and begin to think about how they would complete this. Who helps me now with respect to each of the different aspects of the continuum? And Aileen, I think one of the things that you really had brought to light, and we tried to make very, kind of clear to people, is that this isn't, this is a beginning, that, just the fact that you're here, just the fact that you're starting to think about this, that's what's really important. And we don't want people to get kind of hung up in terms of the getting through this. This is a process, just like these 8 areas are a continuum. And this is a process that will continue throughout your life. Who you choose now possibly to put into some of these positions may or may not be the people that you choose several years from now, even possible several months from now. So it is a continual thing to be thinking about all of the different aspects of this continuum and who your support system is.
Right.
So, Aileen, one of the things that we talked about was, first of all, you have holes in this, having holes in the responses to this, that's normal and okay. And that's part of, again, the continuum of trying to think about who your support system is. But we also talked about that people may have holes in this because for each of us, the definition of these different aspects of the continuum is very personal. So you and I had talked a little bit about, emotional support, let's say. What does that really mean to you when you're thinking about your community, and thinking about who you would like to have or who you want to identify as helping you in that area now? You need to begin by really understanding for yourself, what does emotional support mean to you? Maybe it's, people who are just there to be, eyes and ears for you, to help listen, to maybe help to support you through both good times and bad times. Maybe it's more defined emotional support. Maybe it's also professionals who may be involved in your life in terms of helping to provide emotional support to you in maybe a more clinical manner. So defining these different things. We talked a lot about managing real estate matters. For some people, they own their own home, and maybe managing real estate matters has to do with how you maintain the home, the yard, who's helping you if you're looking to sell the home or buy a home. For other people, they may rent a property, and the managing of real estate matters is very different. What happens if you have a problem in your property? You need somebody to come and fix the plumbing. Who's your team in terms of being able to help manage that aspect of things for you? So I think it's really critical that people first start with identifying or defining for themselves what each of these different aspects of the continuum mean for them.
I completely agree. We're going to return to those. It's also good to get people always ask us, where do I begin? But those that didn't, that whole piece of, as Kathleen was talking about, what do those octagons mean to you individually? What matters most to you? Who and what are important to you? When you're making decisions, and we're going to talk about that going forward, and assigning authority, who do you trust? And what is the status of your plan? So it's just good to keep those four pieces in mind as we talk about these various components. Is there anything you wanted to add, Kathleen?
Well, I think, as you said, Aileen, once people really begin to identify what each of those areas means to them, then it's also then taking a look at these four questions and being able to apply those to not only the definition of the different areas of the continuum, but, as you said, who's the support system, and beginning to identify that. One of the hardest things that we encounter with Solo Agers is really beginning the process. I mean, that's sometimes the hardest thing for people to do. And I hate to see any aspect of this stop someone, but that's human nature. Sometimes we think we have to go from A to Z in a specific order. And I think the truth is none of this has a specific order to it. It is all about beginning with maybe identifying for you what might be the easiest thing, the easiest aspect to define for yourself, and maybe the easiest aspect for you to be able to identify who the support system is. And just to start somewhere, and not to allow the fact that you might not have people now, or you might be having difficulty kind of filling in, let's say, that homework sheet, be the thing that stops you from moving forward. So Aileen, as you talked about really looking at these four questions, sorry, as you just took it down, my apologies.
That's okay.
But really looking
totally
at
fine.
Beginning to identify for yourself, what is most important to you? What, are you most worried about? And Aileen and I have kind of our own specialty areas, she being, in the healthcare realm, myself being in the legal, and particularly talking about the financial aspect. But that's what's important to us as we begin to talk with people, because that's our area of expertise, but that may not be what's most important to you. Maybe beginning with the questions about, about my living situation and what that looks like and what my goals are to that is more important to me than another aspect of this continuum right now. And beginning to address what's most important to you and kind of working your way through it, I think is a good way to approach it.
Either if you're coming to this as somebody identifying as a solo ager or a professional who works with solo agers is enhancing your knowledge base, these resources apply to everyone. There are unique needs for solos, but everyone can benefit from planning.
Absolutely.
And I know I say that all the time, but I think we should all have t-shirts printed, right? That just everyone can benefit from planning. So it's certainly relevant to all of us.
I can't agree more on how important it is. And so I think one of the things, Aileen, you and I had talked about, again, you know, there are many aspects of this, but are focusing kind of on the two areas to kind of help people go through the process of how to begin to think about not only what these things mean to you, but who are the support system that you rely on, and how do you begin to maybe identify the right people, the right professionals to think about putting into that support system for you. So I think we were going to start, you know, Aileen, really talking about the healthcare aspect of the continuum. And if we, again, take a look at the homework sheet, it's not only just the healthcare decision-making, but, you know, we also talked about the fact that these different aspects of the continuum also interplay with each other. You know, so healthcare decision-making may also affect things like where you live. It may also affect things like emotional support. These are all things that intertwine. And so thinking about how you identify your support system in one area may help you also identify who would be appropriate in these other areas. Maybe it's the same group of people. Maybe it's very different groups of people, depending on their strengths, et cetera. So we were really going to focus on kind of two areas today in terms of discussing this, one being the healthcare decision-making per se, and the other really being the financial decision-making.
Right. When it comes to healthcare decision-making, and those of us organizing the program had a robust conversation about this, right? So in the healthcare decision-making, sometimes we think about what are the documents I need for healthcare decision-making if I'm unable to advocate for myself. And those are critical and important, and we're going to give you some tools. There are also all the other pieces of our everyday life, things like going to a doctor's appointment and preparing for that appointment, talking to somebody about it, helping identify priorities and questions you're going to want to ask, attending that appointment with you. If they physically can't, can they be on the phone or on FaceTime or another video chat if that's something you and your provider are comfortable with during your appointment? Can someone give you a ride home if anesthesia is involved and you can't sign yourself out? One of the things we talk about as advocates all the time is that is a barrier in terms of health outcomes, that if you do not have someone to drive you home or to sign you out from a procedure, whether it's a preventative procedure or something else, you may not follow through on those pieces. And so that definitely affects the outcome going forward. So we want to try and eliminate as many barriers as we can. The system in and of itself has many of them, many roadblocks, many speed bumps. But with that planning, we're able to try and have the best outcome we can. So when we talk about health decision-making, that octagon really is inclusive of attending doctor's appointments, planning for various kinds of procedures, and also identifying advocates, healthcare agent at a time that you may be unable to speak for yourself. And I try and remind people, and again, I'm sorry if those of you who have attended many of my talks have heard this many times, but these are decisions that are just as important today as they are for your 120th, 130th birthday, right? They are important today, yesterday, today, and tomorrow. And we should think about them that way. And I know in, you know, Kathleen's work and that, you know, she said, you set people up to think about that in terms of these are dynamic documents, right? They're documents we can change. But it's important that they're current for today. Should we go ahead and look at some characteristics of a healthcare agent or proxy?
Absolutely. And while you're bringing that up, Aileen, why don't I just kind of talk about the healthcare proxy from a legal standpoint here in Massachusetts, just as a reminder to people. We have a specific law here in Massachusetts, which is very different than many of the other states throughout the US. We actually name a proxy. We choose in this state to have a person identified to be able to step into your shoes, to be able to make healthcare decisions for you in the event you become incompetent or incapacitated. So the interesting thing about a healthcare proxy is that it is just a document that identifies who that proxy would be. And it's also a document that gives authority, but it really doesn't speak to you specifically. It doesn't help your proxy or anyone else to really understand what's important to you with respect to healthcare decision-making. So what Aileen's going to now talk about in terms of how do you go about picking an effective individual to be this proxy for you, and somebody who, you know, you can have faith in will be able to step up and make decisions not based on what they want, but based on what you want. That's critical.
Right. Right, extremely critical. So I always say to people that, that not everyone was born to be a healthcare proxy and that, or any kind of representative, and that's okay. But it's good to be mindful of what might be most effective for you if you're unable to advocate for yourself, to speak for yourself. As Kathleen just explained, a proxy is just a stand-in. They are carrying out someone else's instructions based on the fact that the individual who wrote the instructions or designated the instructions is unable to either be present or unable to speak for themselves in the case of healthcare. So when we talk about good characteristics, one of the things we want people who are going to be assertive. We talk about assertive, but not aggressive, right? We want people to be building relationships and navigating healthcare and navigating life are critical. So again, there's that assertive, but not aggressive. But we want to have that attitude of, okay, even if they say, oh, we've never done that before, or that's not part of the, if it's something you think is critical or important, asking assertively some good questions can often affect change. You want someone who's ethical, someone who's able to figure things out and ask good questions, which really aligns with having excellent communication skills, somebody who can keep notes and records, someone who can communicate clearly with the various professionals, medical providers involved in someone's care. And there's a whole range of people, not only clinicians, but other staff as well, depending on the need of the patient. Someone who's an advocate. An advocate is somebody who amplifies the voice of someone else. That's really the role of an advocate. We all play different advocacy roles in our own personal world. You want to make sure that somebody who's signed on as your healthcare proxy is doing that for you. They're amplifying your voice as you're not able to speak for yourself. Someone who's objective. that they're not as emotionally connected or swayed, and that they're going to be, that's going to affect carrying out decisions going forward. Being knowledgeable about death with dignity. We talk a lot now about a good death, right? And those pieces, and there's a lot to say on that. We're not going to cover this afternoon. It's a whole nother session, but just someone who's knowledgeable about those pieces. This is really important, and it's important in all different aspects of our lives, but this isn't about someone imposing their own personal beliefs or values or decisions. That this is about carrying out someone else's instructions, wishes, and interests, and not at all what the individual serving as the advocate feels or believes. So I was just going to say, that's okay. I was just going to say, right, so it's great we think about all those things. We fill out the piece of paper, and as Kathleen said, it's a piece of paper. It doesn't tell us anything else. The critical piece is to make sure that you share with whomever you've identified as your healthcare agent. And Kathleen, would you recommend you have a backup, not only one person, but a second?
Absolutely. I do think it's critical. Yes.
Right. Ideally. That you have the conversation about what you want and what you don't want with the individual. And that can be delineated in something, a personal directive, a living will, an estate plan, which Kathleen can obviously speak to as well.
So just a couple of things from a practical standpoint that we often see. First of all, some misnomers about healthcare decision makers. Remember, you make your own healthcare decisions, except in the situation in which you are incompetent or incapacitated. So I oftentimes have someone who's been named as a proxy who will say, well, why can't I participate? Why can't I make the decisions for this individual? And it's because that proxy has to actually be activated. So your decisions, your wishes, your ability to speak for yourself is not trumped by a healthcare proxy. The proxy is only activated upon your incapacity or incompetence. So that's really important to know, that you remain in control of your own healthcare decisions. And one of the ways to ensure that you remain in control of your healthcare decisions, should you become incompetent or incapacitated, is by going through the exercise of putting a healthcare proxy in writing, naming the persons of your choice to step into your shoes if necessary, and making sure that they have the appropriate framework. Nothing drives me more crazy than when someone is in the middle of a crisis. They go to a hospital setting, let's say, and the first thing they're handed is a healthcare proxy document and said, fill it out now. Certainly, having someone named is better if you can than not naming someone. But these are important documents that affect you while you're still alive. You know, things like wills, those are important, but you're not going to be here when that will actually is put into play. But for things like a healthcare proxy, you are here. This is affecting you and decisions for you. So this is the kind of thing that when possible, we want people to put in place a proxy while they're not under stress, while they're not in some kind of a crisis, so that they're able to clearly think through who really are the best people for me to name in this important position, and how do I help to give them the framework so that if they ever have to step into my shoes, they understand what's important to me. So
absolutely.
Things to think about.
When you refer to a healthcare proxy from the work you do, and you put together an estate plan, you're including something like a personal directive or living will that gives the directives about what someone wants and what someone doesn't want. So sometimes there's some confusion for folks, right? In terms of when we refer to a healthcare proxy, the entity of a proxy is a stand-in. That's all a proxy is.
Right.
But the documents that go together are interconnected, are a living will or personal directive. They have different names. And the document that identifies who will stand in for you. I jokingly refer to that as your Lorax, right? The person who can speak for the trees when the trees can't speak for themselves. And so those are partnered together. In resources, when we are first starting out without the assistance of an attorney, we may be looking at those documents separately. And in the work that you do, Kathleen, you approach it as those are interconnected, and all of those documents get done at the same time, right?
So they are interconnected, but one thing to remember, the document that has the legal authority is the proxy document. That's the beginning and the end with respect to legal authority. Documents such as living wills, or there are some other resources out there, the 5 wishes. There are many different resources that can help someone begin to frame their wishes around healthcare decision-making. Are certainly helpful. They're helpful for you in terms of really beginning to think about the structure and what that would look like in terms of healthcare wishes. And it's very helpful to the person you've asked to step into your shoes. But ultimately, here in Massachusetts, we don't go to those supporting documents. A hospital, a physician isn't going to say, yes, but what does your living will say in this case? Or what did your 5 wishes say? They just go to the proxy, and they want the proxy to be the one who then makes the decisions. So from a legal standpoint, it is the proxy who will make the decisions. But everything else is critical to help support. There's nothing worse than when an individual is asked to be a proxy for someone. Oftentimes, remember, they're dealing with end-of-life decisions. That's oftentimes the point where we see the proxy needing to step forward. And I see a proxy who hadn't been given framework to make decisions. They're really left in the dark, now having to make decisions based on oftentimes their own beliefs and wishes, which is what we're trying to avoid here. We want them to understand yours. We want them to understand what's important to you. So, question often comes up, does these living wills and everything else have any legal implications here in Massachusetts? They don't, but they are good framework. They are a good starting point, and they can help you kind of better understand what's important to you going through this process.
Thank you for that clarification on
Absolutely.
that. And each state is different. So depending on where you're beaming in from, each state has different laws related to whether the living will personal directive is a legally binding document or not.
Right. And
so that's just something else to keep in mind.
It is. And unfortunately, that is one of the issues in the United States is we're not united in a lot of this stuff. We have very different ways of looking at it. People will ask if something happens in another state and I have a Massachusetts healthcare proxy, what will happen? Certainly the proxy, the fact that you have identified somebody who you want to step into your shoes will be given weight in another state and will certainly be evidence of the fact that you've asked this person to be your proxy. But each state is very different, and some states do have written documents that outline. I sometimes get a question about, can you customize the healthcare proxy and put your wishes in it? What happens, remember, is that they being, really the healthcare community, doesn't look at the document from the standpoint of what did this person want and not want. They look at it to say, what authority does the document give? So certain things like the use of antipsychotic medications, the admission of someone to something like a skilled nursing facility, these things require a little bit of additional authority. And so they'll look to see, does the document include that? is the proxy able to make that kind of scope and breadth of decision making? But they won't look at it to say, did this person actually say they want to be resuscitated or they don't want to be resuscitated? They'll leave that question up to the proxy, given the circumstances, given what's happening to the individual.
Should we move on to, while we're thinking about characteristics, should we also shine some light on financial decision makers as well?
Sure. And I think the thing is that most, these two areas, the healthcare decision-making and the financial decision, can have so many ramifications in the other areas. Again, when we talk about healthcare, healthcare can tie into what's an appropriate place in terms of a residency for someone and, what kinds of additional care may they need or not need. It can, and when we talk about the durable power of attorney, which is what we're going to talk about in terms of the financial decision making, that too has, kind of a layover effect in many other areas. This person, again, taking a look at what can you afford in terms of housing and where you may live? What can you afford in terms of support that you may be paying for from professionals, that kind of thing? It has a huge kind of overlay in terms of other decision-making and other kinds of opportunities or challenges that someone may face. So switching to now the financial part of it is what we call a durable power of attorney. And a durable power of attorney is a document. It's like a healthcare proxy in the sense that you're asking someone else, you're identifying who it is who will step into your shoes to manage, quite frankly, all other aspects of your life but healthcare. So this document, most people think about it in terms of financial decision-making, but it can actually overlay into other areas. Like I talked about, possibly making decisions about where your residence would be, should you not be able to do that for yourself. So the document is very broad and very far-reaching. A power of attorney, again, gives a tremendous amount of authority to somebody else to step into your shoes and manage things for you other than healthcare decision-making. Why do we give this type of power? Is oftentimes what people say to me is, why would I ever want to give this kind of authority to somebody else? And the reason why is because if you lose your ability to make decisions for yourself because you become incompetent or incapacitated, and you haven't identified someone else who can step into your shoes, we don't have somebody automatically appointed, not in Massachusetts. Now, other states may have what we call next of kin laws that allow for a kind of a hierarchy in terms of decision-making, both for healthcare and oftentimes for financial issues. But in Massachusetts, we don't. And so our only other option when we don't have a document that has identified a power of attorney, what we call an attorney in fact, or even in the healthcare realm, our healthcare proxy, our only other option is to turn to a court and to get a court involved for the appointment of a conservator to be able to handle your finances and or a guardian to be able to handle all other decision-making for you. Once we get a court involved, it is extremely complicated. You've got to have a judge overlooking everything. It's very expensive. And you no longer, as the individual who is not able to speak for yourself, you don't have the ability to ensure your person of choice is in that position and that your wishes are the ones that are being followed. So we have the fallback by all means of having a court involved, but that's the whole point of what we're trying to avoid here in terms of getting these kinds of legal documents in place. So there's a couple of things to know about powers of attorney. Powers of attorney can be effective when you sign them, meaning that you're completely competent and capable of managing things, but you may want this person who you've asked to be your attorney in fact to have the authority to help you out if you need it. Maybe to help pay bills, to be able to help to address issues let's say around your retirement plans or life insurance policies or property you may own, you can make that decision to give them immediate authority to be able to act on your behalf. So you don't have to be incompetent or incapacitated for them to be able to utilize the power of attorney. The other type of power of attorney requires first that you actually be declared incompetent or incapacitated before it becomes effective. It's oftentimes called a springing power of attorney. And so you need to decide which is the most comfortable way for you to go forward. With the springing power of attorney, the document must be activated first, very much like the healthcare proxy. Remember I said that you get to make your own decisions unless it's been activated because you're incompetent or incapacitated? The same thing for a springing power of attorney. You are managing things yourself until and only if this document has been activated. So some of the things we look at in terms of characteristics for people to be your attorney in fact, one of the things is we want to make sure this person is good with their own finances. If, this person has had questionable issues with how they've handled financial decisions in the past, you're not really comfortable with maybe their philosophy about how finances are handled, how investments are made, this may not be the right person. You want somebody who you can have confidence in, because really the power of attorney is very akin to handling someone's finances for them. And they'll have a broad range of ability to be able to manage your financial affairs. Again, someone who's ethical, very much like the healthcare proxy. You want to make sure that their ethical standards align with your own, and that you are comfortable with the fact that they will be managing this aspect of your life if needed. They need to be willing to ask questions. Oftentimes people can get intimidated when working with financial advisors, banks, financial institutions. They have to be willing to ask the right questions to be able to understand what aspect of finances they're dealing in and what the options are with respect to those finances. They have to be good at communicating. So communicating with you with appropriate, you need to make sure that this person, we try always to make sure that whether someone's acting in the capacity of a healthcare proxy or a power of attorney, that they continue to involve the person for whom they're acting on behalf. Because again, we can have kind of graduated scales in terms of our ability to manage things for ourselves. That doesn't mean information still shouldn't be shared with us when appropriate. And certainly if there are other people within your, kind of your realm of support that you want to make sure are part of the understanding of what's happening, this person who you've named as your attorney, in fact, will be the decision maker, but you still want them when appropriate to share information and to communicate effectively with others. You want to make sure they stay objective with respect to your finances, that they're making good decisions. A power of attorney or an attorney, in fact, actually by law has responsibilities as a fiduciary to you. So they have to make sure that they're handling your finances appropriately. They're not running off buying stock that is extremely speculative with your money. They have to be, conservative, and they have to remember their responsibility is to manage those finances appropriately and on your behalf. So if buying you a new car is an appropriate thing to do for your attorney, in fact, then by all means, that's a decision they could make. But if buying a car is just something that would benefit somebody else who may be within your, sphere of loved ones or people who you are counting on, maybe that's not an appropriate thing to do. So they have to make the decision based on what's best or what is in, your best interest. Actually, it's what's your stepping into your shoes and being you in terms of the decision making that they're making. And they have to be willing to put the time and effort into it. Remember, these are jobs that in some ways you're asking people. It's not easy to step into someone else's shoes to manage their finances. It's not easy to step into someone else's shoes and make healthcare decisions for them. So they need to be willing to take it seriously and to really understand that this is work. And you want to give them, very much like we said, set up the framework for someone with healthcare decision makers. When you've asked somebody to be your attorney in fact, you at least need to make sure that they understand where to begin to look for your financial world, your financial life. Nothing worse than for someone who's asked to step in to someone else's shoes and they don't know where even they bank, where they may keep their important records. You don't have to give them by any means copies of everything at this point, but make sure they know where to begin and how to start all of this. So those are some of the things you want to think about when you're trying to think who would be an appropriate person to name as your attorney in fact under a durable power of attorney. Aileen, anything that you've seen in terms of this with people that you've worked with and experienced with powers of attorney?
I think that the point about when I talk about healthcare proxies, I always remind people it's not the place, your safe deposit box isn't the place to keep that document, right? Or even under a mattress or, you know, hidden in the pantry, right? It's to be accessible. Our financial documents play a different role. There are many one-page, I don't know if your practice gives them to folks, but I know on the Caregiving Alliance website and many other resource websites, there's a one-page, here's where my important documents are, and it's literally one page. And I also remind people that at this point, there's also a digital, right? We also have a digital estate.
Life.
And so now, in addition to all the other people, we need to think about who do we trust to give passwords to and have access to, both in our healthcare world, right, in terms of accessing our online records, and certainly financial, right? There was a time when if you didn't have the financial pieces all in place, you could wait for the mail to come and the bill would come in the mail and you could kind of backtrack it. You know, that's not the most effective system. We'd like it organized going forward, but you could put those pieces together. Many things do not come in the mail the same way for people.
Very true.
And so it's really important that we have that launching point, that starting point that you referred to, right? Where does someone begin? They may not know everything in your stock portfolio, and that's okay, but they should know who to speak to about the stock portfolio, et cetera. So those pieces are really important. And those important documents with social security numbers and all of that are to be placed in safe deposit boxes without a doubt. But consider putting together a one-page. Does your practice have a one-page important papers document? So, and I do that with folks when putting together their plan too, so that it is something you can share because it's again instructive as opposed to authority, right? It doesn't assign authority, it's just instructive as to where to get started. So.
No, I agree.
Move on because I want to make sure, right.
You know, this time, sorry, Aileen, my apologies. This time of year, this is actually a good time where taxes are coming in for you to begin kind of keeping a list of things for yourself. You know, our financial world in particular changes oftentimes throughout the year. But if you take a snapshot each year around this time, again, it gives a beginning point for someone to start looking at things if they needed to.
And since we have, you know, some of the other octagons we didn't go into as much detail about, we thought that these lists of characteristics, these starting points, these prompts would be extremely helpful when you're looking at the other pieces of speaking with someone about choosing where to live, dealing with real estate matters, expanding a support system, right? Thinking about who's good at communication, the point of willing to put in the time and effort to do right by you is definitely universal to all of those octagons in that continuum. So we wanted to also make sure that even though we touched on this in two very specific contexts, they are able to apply to all different aspects. And that's just something to consider as well. We just wanted to remind people, I like your analogy. You want to share it with folks?
How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. And I think that's really true. You begin the journey with small steps.
We have a number of questions here. So one of the questions is, what's the best or complete wording for a healthcare proxy? And can you give someone some examples?
Well, a proxy, quite frankly, there's a very simple form that Massachusetts does offer, and it's widely available. You can find it on the internet. I think we actually have it listed on our resources for the Massachusetts Medical Association. There, you go to your doctor's office. It is just a document, quite frankly, that states, I hereby appoint this person to be my proxy, and it does the basic form doesn't even go into specifics about authority. There is a regulation that supports the document that does talk about what exactly is the breadth of authority for that proxy. One of the things, though, to think about is that there are some additional authorities, particularly around the use of antipsychotic medications, which we see more and more in terms of people who may have forms of dementia. And for the admission into something like a skilled nursing facility, that when we have that one-page document that is widely available, some healthcare organizations, some practitioners don't feel comfortable that it gives enough authority to be able to say, I will go ahead and honor that ability for the proxy to make decisions around antipsychotic medication and the use of them as treatment. So you may want to, speak with a professional about putting something that has a little bit more of a robust set of authorities in it for you. But having that one-page document here in Massachusetts is absolutely a beginning point and something I recommend everybody do. And get in place so that you've at least identified who you want to make decisions for you from a healthcare standpoint.
So the next question was, how does a solo ager find a healthcare proxy?
So again, when we talk about speed bumps, that's definitely one of them. We are fortunate that we know an attorney and an attorney's office that actually serves as proxies for people. That is extremely unique. And we are fortunate. Kathleen is currently one of two attorneys I know in the state of Massachusetts whose practice serves in that role. Kathleen, would you say it's fairly unique at this point? I know that advocates, financial advisors, aging life care managers, I could go on, daily money managers, et cetera, all are not able to play that role and sign on that way.
Right. So definitely it is a unique thing that we do. However, we still utilize the team. You talked about all these people that it's oftentimes, I happen to have a nursing background, but not all attorneys in my office have that. So even though I have the experience with understanding how a healthcare, facility works, how the healthcare, the disease process for many things, what it looks like. The importance of understanding still someone's needs and wants and working with professionals like aging care specialists and all the rest of it is very critical. So where do people begin? I think beginning to look at your own circle and see, is there someone, it is a tremendous responsibility you're asking someone to take for you, no question about that, because again, healthcare decision-making and stepping into your shoes is a big responsibility for someone. But I would begin, first of all, with looking at your own particular, your own support system. Is there someone within that support system that you feel you could have trust, that you feel would make appropriate decisions for you and would be available to step up if necessary? But the use of a professional is certainly an option that you can consider. The downside about a professional, of course, is that there's usually cost associated with it that comes into play when they do act as your healthcare proxy. And you do want to make sure that that healthcare or that professional is well informed about what's important to you, so that again, they're making decisions in your stead and not just based on what they think is right given a certain circumstance.
Okay, next question. We have a lot. What if one family member is the healthcare proxy and another is the power of attorney? And hospice is suggested, but the healthcare proxy wants the loved one to go to a facility, while the power of attorney wants the loved one to have hospice at home. Who gets to choose?
So, from a legal standpoint, first of all, we'd have to see what kind of authority might be in a healthcare, in the power of attorney, and what really are they able to make decisions regarding. This is an issue, and one of the things that, if possible, you think about beforehand when you're naming these important positions and identifying who you want. You need to make sure these people can work together, because as you can see, there are implications for finances in the healthcare world and for healthcare decision-making in the financial world. So ultimately, if it ends up being a decision that has to be made and neither party is willing to compromise and discuss what might be the best for the person they're making the decisions on, we may have to go to a court, and we may have to say to a judge, Your Honor, here's the issue. Who gets to make this decision? What's best? We want to always keep it out of the courts if we can, because that just adds a layer of complexity that, quite frankly, doesn't help anyone. And so really trying to work through have a professional work through with the healthcare proxy and the power of attorney. What are the issues? What are the concerns? What are the ultimate desires of this person? If it was to be at home and die at home, how do we try to honor that? Is there a way of being able to honor that wish? If not, if there is no support system to be able to help this person die at home, and their complexity of their care is such that they really need a skilled nursing facility, these are the things we look at. Like, what is it? Is it just everybody's trying to say, I'm in this position and I'm exerting my authority? Or is everybody trying to really work to what's appropriate for the person whom they're making decisions for? And so looking very closely at what's getting in the way, and how can we come up with a compromise that's really going to honor the wishes of the individual as much as possible.
Great. Okay, the next question. The two people I have named a proxy should have the written instructions of my wishes to follow. But what if they lose the plan before it's needed? How can it always be available?
Well, you should definitely check in with them, right? Again, that dynamic, we want to make sure people are still willing to serve as our proxy. Just because someone said 10 years ago they are willing to do so, they may be not willing, or quite honestly, things may have changed for them and they're unable at this point. One should always have their documents on file, easily accessible. These are the non-safe deposit box documents, right? The ones we put in a binder and keep on a bookshelf and say, important documents here, and there's a neon arrow and things are flat, right? That we make sure that that's accessible. So if someone misplaces something, and I recommend someone has that on paper, I know it's 2022, but still not all of our technology works when we want it to. And in a hospital, technology is often very hard to access. You want to make sure you have it on paper, and you could also have it emailed to you securely, or use a document storage. There's something called Everplan. There's something called DocuBank, in which you can give authority as part of the other pieces of your digital plan. That's another place for resources to be stored as well. Kathleen, I'm sure you have additional suggestions.
No, you actually really hit that really well. I think it's critical that people just remember the old safety deposit box is not the way to go, because most times there aren't others who have access to that box. And so in this day and age, there are so many other kind of technology-based possibilities to really be able to utilize, as long as you're comfortable, some of these other things like DocuBank and Eversource, and sorry, I was going to say Eversource, but it's Ever.
Yeah, no, Everplans. Everplans.
To be able to have access. I also tell people, I mean, for those who are still paper oriented, you know, most times we kind of have a drawer that we keep our tax returns, that we keep kind of the important papers in our life. And again, we don't need to give copies of those to the people we've asked to be in these positions, but they should at least know where to begin. And I think, Aileen, your point that this is not a one and done situation, that this is a living, breathing process, that you do want to touch base with the people you've asked and use that time to also say, you know, let me just make sure you're comfortable and understand what's important to me, and make sure everybody's kept up to date with what might be happening with you.
Next question. If you want to ask a friend to be power of attorney or backup, could you offer to pay them to do that? And is there a typical amount you'd recommend offering?
So very common question and a good one. And most times in the documents, as long as you would like to, we do have the ability to compensate the person who's acting, because this is work and this is a job for them to be doing. So compensation is certainly something you can offer. And there's many different ways to do that. You can outright give a gift to somebody. You can just compensate them on a flat rate. You can also specify an hourly rate for work that they may do. Or oftentimes we do it a little bit more generally, that, you know, someone may be reasonably compensated. Now, that isn't a specific definition at all. What is reasonable to one person may be very different to another. But it does give a little bit of flexibility, because again, ideally you're putting the documents in place and they're not going to be needed to have to, you know, be used at any point until 30, 40 years down the road and not having to update them. Not what I recommend, but sometimes that happens. So we can put in a more general statement if you choose to give a reasonable compensation.
Great. Next question. What documents deal with the other authorities that would need to be delegated?
So that's kind of that's maybe an unending question in the sense that things like powers of an attorney and a healthcare proxy documents really do manage the majority of things. However, someone may have other types of aspects to their estate plan. For instance, they may have a trust. If there's a trust and there's assets owned by that trust, it will be the trustee who has authority over that trust, not the power of attorney. And so part of what you need to understand is what is making up your kind of overall financial world, your estate, and then how do you have these things managed? And that's going to identify who's going to have what authority. Remember, as I said, a will, although a very important estate planning document, doesn't affect what happens to you while you're alive. It's only affecting what happens to your estate after your death. An important thing to outline, but that individual doesn't have any authority. The person you've named to be what used to be called an executor, we now call it a personal representative, they have no authority during your lifetime. So it's really these other critical documents. You may also name someone. Sometimes people have put people as joint owners on assets. Remember, those have both pros and cons that you need to fully understand. But if someone's a joint owner, then they may have a certain level of control and access by all means to that asset as a joint owner. So there are many different ways of being able to name and give authority to people, but the two main documents that we deal with are really that power of attorney and the healthcare proxy.
Great. And the last question, I believe, is what about a MOLST form?
A MOLST form is designed to be a document that is triggered when someone has either diagnosed with a serious illness or terminal disease, and it's a document that that one fills out with their clinician, with their medical provider, so that all parties are fully understanding of what the patient wants going forward and does not want in treatment going forward for the illness. It's to make sure everyone's on the same page. It is a form that walks you through what you want and what you don't want, but its original intention, and because Massachusetts changes the names of things, if you talk about that form with someone else in another state, in other states, it's nationally, it's called a POLST form, P-O-L-S-T. Massachusetts, it's called a MOLST form. Speaking the same language is always good. So I always remind folks that things are different names in different places. But that's the intention of the form. It does give instructions, so it is useful, but it is not necessarily a required document as part of one's advanced care planning.
Right.
Kathleen, would you like to be constructive about that?
Well, no, I think your explanation is great. One thing that I like to describe it as is it's akin to a prescription. This is a physician signed form. So it's a physician's order, PO. That's what the PO stands for. In Massachusetts, it's medical order, but same thing. And this is a prescription that is supposed to follow you no matter what setting you're in. So it used to be that when someone was in the hospital and then went to the rehab, or they went home, the orders that were in each of these different facilities didn't follow from one to the next. The idea of the MOST form is that you're able with a physician to outline what's critical to you, as Aileen said, in the case of a serious illness, in the sense that, it's considered that it would probably lead to end of life, or that you are at the end of a chronic illness and that you are at potentially end of life decision making, or you are of a certain age, which is a little bit controversial because that's very subjective as to what is an appropriate age for someone to consider end of life decision making. But this order then can be followed regardless of what setting you're in. So if you're at home and the decision is made not to resuscitate, this order will protect or will provide for a medical order that a responding first responder can follow. Let me explain that. Someone dials 911, first responders show up at your house. Absence of any kind of documents to the contrary, they're going to resuscitate and they're going to get you to the hospital. That's their job. The MOST form then can be presented, because most of us, the first thing that we're going to do when someone a loved one of ours, it starts to have difficulty at home, is we're going to call 911. So now they show up. If there's a MOST order in place, they're able to follow that MOST order, and they don't then have to resuscitate if that is what in fact the MOST order does have on it. So it's a way for us to try to make it so that someone's wishes are known and followed regardless of the setting in which they may be.
Okay, we now have two more questions. One of them is, are there other documents for other health-related authorities beyond the healthcare proxy?
So there's the HIPAA authorization and release form, which allows you to identify people who will have the ability to speak with your healthcare providers. It doesn't necessarily make them decision makers, but it does allow them to be able to have communication with the healthcare providers and obtain information about what's going on with you. It oftentimes gets rid of that game of phone phone tag that happens, where what happens in the beginning of the phone conversation isn't what happens at the end of the phone conversation. Certainly there's authorities, again, even, medical offices, we try to do one one basic HIPAA that can be given to everybody, but every provider that you speak to is often asking you, who can we leave messages with? Who can we talk with? Can we leave a message on the answering machine if you still have an answering machine in your home? That kind of thing. They'll ask for those explicit authorities. Someone who can speak with your healthcare insurance providers, that can be a big issue too. Who has the ability to speak on your behalf and to talk about claims that may be being made.
Great, and those documents have to be filed before the insurance company or the hospital or whoever. There's a process. And like Kathleen said, sometimes a universal form, right? I work with my clients, I have them fill out, a HIPAA release that hopefully we can use for any provider and insurance company going forward. A lot of facilities require their own form is filed, and they have a process. When it comes to your medical access to your records, often electronically housed in something called a portal or a gateway, you can assign, you can give authorization to somebody else to have their own login for that. That too is a process. If it is someone you trust, that is a good piece of information to include in your digital estate. And your any documents you have that says what your login is to your portal. That's the quickest way to access your information, but there are processes in which you can authorize someone to access that information. But just keep in mind, none of it's instantaneous. So if you if you think that would be helpful going forward, start a process now when it's beautiful and sunny and you're not emotional or in crisis, and that way, right? It's the fixing the roof while the sun is shining concept, right? So just give that some thought as well. We're used to things being instant now with technology. We access a lot of things instantly, but these processes are not instant at all.
Okay, so I have another question. If you have someone living in independent housing and they do not have someone designated to speak for them, and they need to go into memory care and can't make that decision themselves, what would you recommend? Does it have to go into a court, Kathleen?
So I'm presuming the person asking this question is someone who's worried about this individual, and that they're not making the decision either based on what they think they should be doing, or there's some forces that are saying this person's no longer safe to be staying at home.
Right.
Yes, if there are no documents in place that name somebody who can step in and make decisions, we've got to do something to get someone identified as the decision maker. And the only process is to go to court and to have this person declared incompetent. Because remember, someone can be competent and still make decisions that others may feel are bad decisions, but guess what? They get to do that. Just because you don't agree with the decision, they still get to do that if they're competent to do so. And so we have to go through a process to prove that this person is not competent any longer to be making these decisions, and that now someone else has to step forward to do that. So, it can be tough just because someone is not liking the decisions someone's making, they're not feeling they're the best ones for them. That's not always enough reason to say we've got to force something and make it so this person has to move. We have to go through a legal process to show that they are no longer competent, and then a judge will appoint somebody to make that decision for them.
Thank you. In the meantime, if you don't know Seniors Blue Book, I would suggest you pick one up at your local library or senior center. We have books being delivered next week, so if you can't get one, feel free and reach out to me, but it has a lot of other resources and articles that I think you would find helpful. and it's free. So take two and give one to a friend.
An incredible resource that we use very frequently in the office.
Yes.
So thank you.
And I refer to it frequently as well.
Yeah. Kathleen,
Yes.
I'm not sure that you did make it clear that the power of holder of the power of attorney has no authority over a will or a trust that's created as a post.
So Judy, that's actually not accurate. A power of attorney, depending again on the wording in the document, may actually be given the authority to make changes to someone's trust. They can be given the authority to make changes to beneficial designations on things like retirement plans and life insurance policies. So it is very dependent on what the document says and what types of authority someone wants to give. Now, wills are a little different. To sign somebody's will, that does require actually, would need to get court authority to make sure that that was allowable. But there can be times in which we do go to a court and say, this person doesn't have a will, or their will needs to be changed because of the following things. Court, do you agree? And of course, the court has safeguards to ensure that the question is properly vetted before it's allowed.
Thank you.
I really thank you all for all your time. I know we've gone over. I hope you found it useful. And again, Generations Law and Beacon Patient Advocates, I can't thank you enough for offering your time and knowledge.